Hi, and welcome to Spirit Chapel. This is our first week of a series. This is our first week of Spirit Chapel. So we decided to start out with what I call the Foundation series. This is a group of sermons. There'll be 4 of them all together. And it talks about the changes that God worked in my life before He would allow me to start Spirit Chapel. And I wanted to do that in case anybody's wondering what kind of a place this is and what kind of a pastor you're listening to and all that. So I thought this would be a good way of kind of doing a level set. And we're going to start out today with the very first, most critical gate God took me through. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Now, before I am doing what I'm doing now, my career was something known as a sales engineer. I was based in Dallas, and I traveled a lot for work. In fact, I have traveled over 1 million miles on American Airlines. That's true. I have a permanent gold status with them that I can never lose. I have a little card that says permanent gold. And that and $4.50 will buy you a cup of coffee at Starbucks, but I'm kind of proud of it. Anyway, when I first started out, a bunch of the guys in the company took me out to dinner, kind of showing the rookie the ropes sort of thing. And that was the first time I ever heard of something called the 50-mile rule. Now, we're in church, so I won't ask you if you know what the 50-mile rule is. I'll just say, for those of you who may not have heard of it, that the 50-mile rule states if you're more than 50 miles from home, it's not cheating, if you know what I mean. Now, the guy who told me this kind of chuckled and everybody laughed. It was sort of a joke. But as I got to know them a little bit over time, I found out that every one of them sitting around that table had some kind of a 50-mile rule. Not that they were trying to hook up every chance they got, although some of them probably were. But they all had some things they would do when they were on the road that they would never consider doing when they were at home. It might be going to a strip club. Or one guy told me he and his friends played a game. They would try to see how many phone numbers they could get from the bartenders and the waitresses. And I was kind of young, and I knew this guy was married, so it must have been showing on my face, And he said, well, it's just a game. It's for fun. It's not like we ever call the numbers, And I don't know, maybe it was just for fun. Maybe they never called the numbers. But I'm pretty sure that they never played that game at home, at least not if they have a wife like mine. I can't imagine how that conversation would go. Hey, honey, let's have some fun tonight. We'll go down to Hooters, and I'll try to see how many waitresses' phone numbers I can get. Yeah, that's a game I would have only played once, I can promise you. But they all had something that they would do at their 50-mile rule than they would at home, because we're very good in America at compartmentalizing our life. And I was thinking about this recently because I wonder how many of us have a 50-mile rule with God. And again, that's maybe not 50 miles because it's hard to have that rule with a God who's everywhere. Maybe it's more like a day of the week rule. To be honest, up until very recently in my life here, I kind of had a 50-mile rule with God. There were things that I would do on Monday morning that I would never consider doing on Sunday. And as the week rolled on, maybe even more things. And by the time Friday rolls around, I kind of hang around with the guys, maybe even more things. I mean, don't get me wrong. It's not like, I taught Sunday school on Sunday and sold crystal meth on Wednesday or anything. It was small things, subtle things, but things that I knew wouldn't have gone over so big with, the church crowd that I hung with on Sundays. And part of my job, of course, I wasn't a salesman, but I worked with the sales force, and my company had a certain expectation that we would, present things a certain way. I mean, I don't want to say that I lied exactly for my company.
Yes, I lied. I'm a writer. I give the truth. Scope.
Yes. Yeah, that's kind of what it was. I gave a lot of truth, a lot of scope. And as time went on, I got pretty good at this. Now, I have to tell you that to be honest with you, this wasn't something that I sort of slid into accidentally. This was something I pretty much cultivated from a very early age. You see, I'm a preacher's kid. And when you're a preacher's kid, you find out very quickly that people have a certain expectation of you before they ever meet you. And I didn't want to be that guy. I didn't want to be that person they thought I was, the stereotype. And so I worked very hard to fight against the stereotype. And so I kind of started living by this everything in moderation, which, by the way, doesn't show up in the Bible. But the way I lived my life, you would have thought it was the first commandment. I tried very hard, to kind of find that halfway point. I call it a halfway holy. So I could be with people and be real. And I actually thought that this was better, because I was a real Christian. I wasn't one of those fake Christians or the goody-goody Christians from Sunday school or from church. I was a real Christian. People could relate to me. And I told myself that this is what it's supposed to be. This is how I'm supposed to be. And I lived my life accordingly. After a period of time, though, you kind of find out that when you live this sort of halfway holy life, it kind of sucks. I mean, I know there's more evangelical, ecclesiastical way of saying it than that, but the problem when you kind of live with both the sinners and the saints is that you never quite fit in with the sinners or with the saints. It almost doesn't matter. If you're hanging with the partying crowd or the people who just go out and have a good time, and you're going with them, invariably they're going to want you to do something that you don't feel comfortable with. It's like, that doesn't quite work. And in your mind you have this line drawn, that you say, okay, I'm going to go this far, but no further. And no matter where that line's drawn, before very long you're going to find yourself smack up against it. Because I don't know if you knew this about sinners, but sinners sin. As one theologian put it, dogs bark, cats meow, sinners sin. It's kind of what they do. And they don't understand this line that you have drawn in your mind. It doesn't make any sense to them at all. And so very quickly when you find yourself pushed up against it, they'll wonder why suddenly you're saying no. And even in your mind you're thinking, well, I've compromised here, but this time I'm going to draw the line. They don't see it. They kind of look at you like you're crazy. Wait a minute. The strip club's okay, but you're going to say no to the lap dance? That doesn't make any sense. It's okay to go out and party with us and get drunk, but you're going to, draw the line at weed, or sexting's okay, but you're not going to send the picture. It almost doesn't matter where you draw your line. Your sinner friends are going to try to pull you over it. And then you find that you have one of two choices suddenly. Either you go over the line, and then you have this conversation with yourself the next day. Man, I can't believe I did that. I'm never going to do that again. I don't know if anybody else ever had that conversation the next morning. Maybe I'm the only one. But that's a bad conversation. But if you say no, if you hold the line, you say, no, you know what, I'm not going to do it, your friends offer you no grace at all. It's not like, oh, okay, you compromised 10 times, we'll cut you slack on this one. No, they start pushing harder, or they start mocking, or they get really angry because they don't understand why suddenly you're holding that line. And I found this a lot, but I was okay with it because I thought, you know what? God knows. And there's probably a party right now in heaven because God's sitting there saying, yeah, okay, 9 times out of 10, he said yes when he should have said no, but boy, that one time, that was great. And I don't really know exactly how I thought in my mind that Judgment Day goes, but I guess if I thought about it at all, I would have thought it went something like this, where I figured God must grade on a curve, right, because all the cool teachers do. So I'm figuring that I'd go there and God would kind of give you that stern look of disapproval, that the parent gives a child when they're pretending to be mad at them, but they just can't help themselves. Like, oh, Mark, you scallywag, because, God would talk like a 50s father, and hey, come here, and you maybe give me a noogie and send me to heaven, maybe a holy noogie, and off I'd go. Something like that, because in my mind I was thinking, I'm really not that bad. In fact, in my mind, I already knew a lot of people that were worse than me. In fact, to be honest, I could stand in my porch and I could point to the houses of all the people who I knew were worse than me. And don't laugh. I mean, if you're living this halfway holy life, that's all you've got. So you're doing it a lot. You're pointing to say, well, I'm not as bad as that person, so I must be okay. And I thought, again, I'm keeping it real. God's going to be happy with that. But what happened was after a long period of time, and I had gone through this halfway holy living, I found myself one day in an area of the Bible that I absolutely never end up in. It's Revelation, and I don't know if you ever read the book of Revelation, but the book of Revelation, it was written by St. John when he was exiled on Patmos Island, and it's kind of a visionary dream of the end of the world. And it's symbolic, and it's got all these imagery in it, and some of it gets very strange, like you must wonder what John was eating before he went to bed kind of visions, and it kind of scared me a little bit, so I usually didn't read Revelation. But this one time I found myself in the early part of it, and it was interesting because Jesus was judging churches in this part. And the churches are actually types of Christians. So this church was this type, and this church was this type. And I'm reading it, and I found that Jesus had my type. He had the church of Laodicea, and that is the church of the moderate Christian. Because, again, not too hot, not too cold, kind of halfway. If we were Goldilocks' porridge, we would be just right. I'm thinking, well, this is my church. This is the church of the halfway holy. This is the church of the moderate Christian. And so I started reading it with interest, like, what does Jesus have to say about me in my church? And I found that this is what Jesus said about it. He said, I know your works. You're neither cold nor hot. I'm like, yep, that's me. Goldilocks porridge right here, just right. And then he goes on. He says, but because you're lukewarm and you're neither cold nor hot, I will spew you out of my mouth. Now, in case you're looking at that word spew and you're thinking, oh, that's a strange word. I don't know what that means exactly. Gee, I wonder if it's Greek for holy noogie. Let me help you with that. The actual word for spew that's used here is emio, and it means to vomit with force. I don't write the Bible. I just read it. So in other words, this isn't like throwing up in your mouth a little bit. This is like violent throwing up. The time when you go for distance, not for style, that kind of throwing up. That's what Jesus is describing here. And this picture that he's getting, he's saying, you know what I think about your halfway holy life? It makes me want to vomit. And not just a little bit. It makes me want to throw up. And I remember when I read that, I kind of put the Bible down and I thought, that's kind of harsh. Here's somebody who's kind of trying. They're not all bad, right? They're halfway there. They're halfway holy. Why would Jesus be so harsh over this? Why say this? You make me so sick, I want to vomit. And I literally said that out loud. I'll never forget. I put the Bible down and I looked at it and I said, Jesus, why so harsh? And I never expected him to answer, but he did. Because no sooner did I say that than it rang in my head. I said, Jesus, why are you so harsh about the halfway holy thing? And Jesus said, because I didn't go halfway to the cross. I'm all in for you. And you're playing games. And it makes me sick. And I listened and watched that, and I suddenly realized that I was staring at something known that I'm going to call the Jesus razor. See, let me explain this a little bit, because I'm a geek and I deal with engineers and scientists all the time. And if you've done some studying in science, you may have come across something that's known as Occam's razor. And Occam's razor is named after a nobleman who was there during the Age of Enlightenment of science, when they're kind of rediscovering everything and re-challenging everything, like the earth was not the center of the universe and things like this. And what they found out was, as they kind of threw out a lot of old understandings and they started going off into new areas, they had a tendency to run down a lot of rabbit holes of things that might be true, and it was wasting everybody's time. And Occam came up with something that became known as Occam's razor to try to help them sift through the junk science from the real science. And it's simply this: the simplest answer is usually the best. In other words, if you hear hoofbeats, it's probably not zebras. It's probably horses. And that might seem, well, that's really simple, but it actually helped them focus and cut through a lot of garbage in the early days, and it helped them make a lot better discoveries because of it. Well, this is the Jesus razor. And it's simple too. It simply says this: either Jesus is for real or he isn't. And I know that seems really simple, like very simple. But the reality is, if you give this question the time that it deserves, and if you're honest about your answer, it has to change your life. I mean, if you say, look, I don't think Jesus is real. Okay. Well, then what are you doing here? I don't just mean here in this church today. Why do you ever go to any church? Why celebrate Easter? Why celebrate Christmas? It's just a charade if Jesus isn't real. I'll go you one step further. If Jesus isn't real and he's lying about all this, there is no God, guess what? There's no morality. Because there can be no morality without God. You have to have an ultimate judge to decide what's right and wrong. Otherwise, you let society judge. Society cannot tell you what's right and wrong. Society can only tell you what's legal or illegal, and it's not the same thing. For example, just going back a few years, a couple decades, in the 40s, there was a society in Germany that thought it was completely okay to kill millions of Jews. In fact, a lot of Germans thought it was their moral duty to exterminate the Jew. Now, would anybody here like to argue that that's moral? No, but society said it was, so a whole generation grew up believing it was okay. You know, you think, okay, well, Germans, they're weird. Well, what about this country? 100 years ago, I would have been okay owning a slave. There were good moral men, at least they believed themselves to be good moral men, who would get in their buggies and go to town to attend lectures on philosophy and morality, and on the way there, they would pass by their fields when their slaves were there working and never bat an eye. Does anybody want to try to say that that was moral? No, it was legal, but it wasn't moral. You cannot allow society to determine morality because society doesn't know what's right and what's wrong. So in other words, if there is no God, there's no morality. It doesn't matter what's wrong. It only matters what you can get away with. And if you really believe this, if you want to say, you know what, I'm sure there's no God, then you should live your life completely differently. For one thing, you're going to die in a few years and it's over. Right? So why bother getting married? Why bother having kids? Why bother doing anything moral or good? Just get away with it if there's no God. On the other hand, on the flip side of that razor, if Jesus is for real, then you have to change your life accordingly. Now, sometimes we get the Bible in it, people get all wrapped up and they miss the point. So let me take the Bible out of it for a second and let me give you a parable, like a modern day parable. Suppose you walked out of here this morning and you see this guy standing out there in a limousine and nobody go rushing to the windows. This is not really out there. But he's out there and he's waiting and you come out the door and he hands you an envelope and he gets in his limousine and drives away. And you open up the envelope and you start reading this incredible story. It turns out that billionaire Bill Gates has recently discovered he was adopted. And since he found that out, he has been obsessed with finding his family. So he's hired detectives to go find them. And now I have some good news and some better news, some bad news and some worse news for you. Because the detectives have tracked you down and they've discovered that you're one of Bill's long-lost relatives. The better news is he has a stack of bearer bonds inside of an attaché case at the Biltmore Hotel in Seattle. All you have to do is show up, give him 2 forms of government ID, sign some paperwork, and it's yours. Okay, so here's the bad news. When Bill came up with this idea, his attorneys prevailed upon him to put a time limit on it. Otherwise, people would be coming out of the woodworks forever. And so they put a time limit on it, and it turns out that that time limit expires at 6 p.m. tonight. So here's the worst news. I checked all the flights leaving Greater Pittsburgh Airport, and there is not one flight that can get you to Seattle in time for you to collect your reward. So what do? Do you give up, leave here and go drink, tell everybody, wow, I was almost a billionaire? I hope not. I hope everybody's more creative than that. Do you realize that there is a business over here at Allegheny County Airport called Corporate Jet? And Corporate Jet has a whole fleet of the new G280 Learjets, fastest jet that Lear makes. This thing is plenty fast enough and holds enough fuel to get you from here to Seattle by your deadline. No problem at all. Of course, it's Sunday, so they're closed. But I called the owner, and he's willing to come in. I explained your plight to him, and the owner's willing to come in and fill up his jet and fly you to Seattle. But he wants paid. So here's the deal. What you need to do is leave your house with the clothes on your back and your family and nothing else. Hand over the keys to everything you own, whether cars, boats, anything, and sign paperwork that says it's all his. Lock, stock, and barrel, everything is now his. If you'll do that, he will fly you to Seattle. The question is, do you do it? Do you take the deal? I would. I got to tell you, this may surprise you, but there is nothing I own that's worth $500 million. Everything I own is not worth $500 million. Now, there are some things that are, kind of sentimental, photographs, but come on, most of the good stuff's on Facebook already. I have a dresser of my grandpa's, but $500 million. Besides, although we didn't agree to it, I'm pretty sure tomorrow I can buy that dresser back for $100 grand. I would do this thing in a heartbeat. There's only one way that I would not take this deal, and that's if I thought the guy was a fraud. Just some prankster, owns a limousine, spends Sundays punking people. Then I wouldn't do it. But if I thought this was real, oh yeah, in a heartbeat. This is almost a no-brainer. So now let me bring the Bible back into the picture. The God of the universe wants to adopt you into his family and give you his inheritance. Why would we mess around with that? I mean, you may have heard the expression, now this person has more money than God. No, they don't. Let me tell you something. Nobody has more money than God, because Psalm 24:1 says, the earth is the Lord's and everything that's in it. That means that everybody's wealth is a subset of God's wealth. Let me put this in street terms for you. God could buy and sell Bill Gates 10 times over and still have enough money left over to buy and sell Warren Buffett. This God wants to adopt you into his family and give you his inheritance. You say, well, I'm not motivated by money. Well, what are you motivated by? Intelligence? Do you know that Jesus at age 12 was confounding the scholars of his day? Sometimes we forget who the scribes and Pharisees were. They were the scholars, the best of the best. Not just anybody got to be a scribe or a Pharisee. They spent years studying. They knew everything about the history and the literature and the scriptures of their day. And at age 12, Jesus walked into a temple and blew their minds with an understanding and was able to connect dots they have never heard before. At age 12. Okay, that was Jesus, right? Do you know that Peter and Paul, well, Paul was a scholar, but Peter wasn't. He was a blue-collar guy, a fisherman. He may not have even been literate when Jesus met him. He hung around Jesus for 3 years, and he went out and started blowing people's minds. The Bible tells us that God wants to recreate Jesus' mind in you. What are we doing messing around with this? So you don't like money, you don't like intellect. What about creativity? Do you think the God who created the Grand Canyon could help you be more creative? This is the God that wants to adopt you into his family, and we're playing games with it. It doesn't make sense. Forget the spiritual level. It doesn't make sense on a human level. It all comes down to this. Either Jesus is for real or he isn't. You need to make up your mind on that. It's the most important question you could ever answer. More important than where you go to school, who you're going to marry, what you're going to live, and if the Steelers will ever get an offensive line. It's more important than any of those questions. It's simply the most important question in your life, and you have to answer it before you can go on with your life, because it's a decision point. If Jesus is for real, you have to live like it. And if he's not, be honest. Live like it. Either Jesus is for real or he isn't. Now I know that at this point in the sermon, most of you are expecting to have some soft music coming in from the sides, and the pastor's voice gets very dramatic, and he tells you that you need to decide right now because you don't know what could happen. You could walk out that door in a minute, and you could be hit by a truck out there and find yourself face to face with your Maker. And we are so not going to do that. And I'm not going to do that for two reasons. First of all, I want you to know that our parking lot is very safe, and the chance of you getting hit by a truck out there is so remote that it's hardly worth mentioning. But secondly, and more importantly, this isn't important decision. And any important decision should not be made emotionally. Jesus doesn't want you to make it emotionally. Jesus said, count the costs. And you need to do that. You need to understand that there is a cost if you decide, you know what, Jesus, you're for real. And here's the cost, just like the story. Everything you have for everything you can be. That's the Jesus Razor. Now, I know this is our first day, and this is our first week, and there are a lot of people here for various reasons. We've had friends coming by to wish us well, and some people maybe got dragged here, and as a preacher's kid, I feel your pain. But I want you to know, although you had your reason for being here today, God had his reason. And I believe that God wanted to get in front of you and say, do you think I'm for real or not? It's time to make up your mind.